I'm Josh. This is a collaboration mock following the events that have gone on in Ukraine this year. So starting out on the left, we have kind of a city scene of the original first days of the invasion, the push into some of the big cities and the confusion that had gone on. So we have different tanks rolling in and civilian population as well as some local folks kind of just trying to figure out what the heck's going on. As we move past into this one, we kind of get into we're trying to follow a little bit of seasonal stuff in it as well, but as we move down in the middle here, we get into some of the different areas that we're eventually withdrawn from. There's some battle-damaged vehicles. There's people out getting aid and getting help. We thought it was pretty important to share some of kind of the more topical bits that have gone on. All the sunflowers and stuff like that starting to bloom in the fields, as well as, of course, the tanks being, pulled away by tractors and stuff, which has been kind of a silly, prominent thing that has been going on a lot. So we have kind of that scene, and then it starts to devolve into some of the other things that have been going on.
I love this building here as well, with the interiors there.
Oh, yes. So that was done by Sean, who's one of the other members that collaborated on this. The details on the backside of this are great, and they're really awesome to see on the front, too, because it gives a lot of depth. Even though the building is a kind of a facade building, you still see there's a lot of detail put into it. Each one of them is a home. They all have their own colors. There's their own people living in them, which is really neat.
And what does that minifigure represent on top there?
So that's Saint Javelin. That was a thing that had been going around at the start of the conflict as Western nations started pouring in different anti-tank munitions and stuff like that. That was kind of I believe a meme that came out of the region as maybe a pseudo thank you or a little bit of just a tongue-in-cheek, dark-humored joke of the people receiving the ability to defend themselves. And so we felt that had to be included.
Perfect. We can keep moving down. What was this section?
So this is the Azovstal steel plant. So this is the siege that went on in there for many, many months. So we've tried to represent and capture the different pieces, having a lot of different. There isn't a single complete anything in the set. Everything's kind of blasted away. We tried to put some different flashing lights on it just to represent the different, the titanic struggle that happened here. So trying to have a lot of things happening in a little amount of space just to represent the amount of stuff going on. So there's lots of different action. I think every minifig here on the table is doing something or actively participating or engaged in some kind of action. A lot of different vehicles moving around and that kind of stuff just to try to get the how much is going on at once.
Yeah. And the lights really make it pop as well. So do you know where those are from?
Oh, yeah. So those are from Brick Stuff. So it's their lighting kits. We have one or two on here. This one might not be turned on. This one's actually kind of cool. I don't know if that battery might have died, but it has a sound. It's one that has a sound effect attached to it too, which, of course, with inside the con you can't hear it, but when it's quiet and we turn it on in the morning, it's kind of a cool thing to hear the little sync. So very neat.
What are some of the elements you guys use to capture that kind of steel structure here?
Oh, yeah. I thought it was pretty interesting because there's not a lot of different elements being used, which at first we all thought was a little bit problematic. There doesn't seem to be a lot of depth to the different pieces we're using. But once everything got stacked up, we realized that there doesn't need to be, because people aren't building steel plants to look beautiful. They're building them to be functional. So if we're just using pieces like train tracks and suspension pieces in here, and we're using them in the right angles, we can use 3 or 4 different pieces and still make something that looks kind of big and functional.
So as we exit that section, what do we have at this end?
Yeah, so as we get to this end, this is kind of the hopefully the hope is returning. Things are changing pace. Hopefully what people are seeing when they're looking at this one is an integration of a lot different pieces of equipment. So we have Warsaw Pact equipment, like the Ukrainian tank. But following in that, hopefully what people gather is in the same convoy, they have Western Humvees with 777 artillery. There's an MLRS, a multiple launch rocket piece in the back as well, kind of synchronizing fires. And so the intent, hopefully, with this piece is you're seeing something that's recently been retaken as the Ukrainians are able to integrate new pieces of equipment and aid from the West and continue to push forward, essentially. So we have some different scenes, some customized minifigures out there. There's a President Zelensky, some of his cabinet, I think, giving a press conference or a speech or viewing the area, the recently recaptured area. We have some different forces and unique minifigures along the tops of the buildings, and different soldiers on the ground rendering aid to civilians and stuff like that. And of course, still your steadfast Ukrainian farmer still just getting his crops out of the field while the world is changing around them. So that's hopefully the idea that people are captured at the end of the scene is, hopefully the tide is turning, equipment and aid is here, and they're pushing back the other way now.
Yeah. The whole layout is done really fantastic here. Do you know how long the whole thing is?
That's a really good question. I know that specific piece I worked on is about 3 feet. I think this whole thing is probably about 15. That's about 12 feet long.
Okay. Yeah. Very impressive here. And so one thing that runs throughout the whole build is the vehicles. So are there any more details you can kind of point out, any parts or anything like that as we work our way through some of these vehicles here?
Oh, yeah, sure. So some of the vehicles are kit vehicles from places like Brickmania and stuff like that. A lot of the builders on here are vets, and so a lot of the vehicles you see influences of things that we either worked on or things that we directly worked with or used in our service time as well. And a lot of times they're amalgamations of that. So for instance, the MLRS piece in the back, this is a Brickmania kit, but this is a piece that a bunch of it has been taken apart and retooled. Because one of the builders two of us were MLRS crew members in the Army, so this is a piece that we were able to go, I have really intricate understanding of how this works, and I can take this off and put this thing on. So for instance, like the crew bar that runs around the top of it, the cooler on the top, the rocket coming out with the exhaust are all just added in pieces from our experience of knowing how the equipment works. And the same thing kind of exists with a few of the tanks down on the other end as well, where we put kind of our own flavor to them.
Sure, we can go back down there and take another closer look, especially at the town, some of the buildings and everything there, and even any of the vehicles you want to point out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for instance, the tank that's being drugged here, specifically the fun part is the for sale sign stuck on it, because obviously, tax-free equipment, but a lot of the different pieces on here have been retooled, so the colorations of them were changed just to try to make it look like either it's camouflaged and or rusty or it's had some use in the past. So some of the different pieces on there, specifically the armor pieces here, where these are made to look like they've been attached after the fact and added as extra armor onto the sides. The same thing exists with the fire engine up there as well. That's one thing that we wanted to capture in this set, because a lot of the stuff that's been going in to help isn't just tanks and Humvees and artillery, it's ambulances and fire trucks and stuff, service vehicles. So that specific fire engine was built, and then we threw little extra pieces of armor and stuff on it, just as a way to say, like, hey, if you're operating these pieces of equipment and it's still dangerous, you're going to do what you can to protect yourself. So we've added some extra details on it like that.
I also like the terrain details, sort of like the trenches here, even a little like foxhole type design there.
Oh, yeah. So that was a lot of fun getting to build that, because it wasn't necessarily some of it was an after effect where we said, hey, it would be good to have some of these things. But a lot of these terrain pieces were deliberately planned, where you had the terrain was built first, or the trench was built, and then everything else came around it. So having some depth in there, specifically like your hasty foxhole that this little feller's in here with some of his extra garbage and things, versus your more established foxholes as you get to the other side that have been clearly dug out and have bridges and stuff going over them.
And one nice thing is you've kind of done different scenes, like you were saying earlier, about kind of the more natural look with some of the farm fields. You've got some trees, but then the much more stark kind of gray look of the steel. And so there's a mixture throughout the whole build, so you get an idea of all the different kind of areas where the fighting has gone on.
Yeah, and that was absolutely deliberate. There was we all kind of contributed our separate pieces, and in talking about how do we integrate them, the conversation was at first, how do we build one very big, interesting thing? And when it turned out that we all had different things that we thought was interesting and wanted to focus on, the turn came from, let's do one big creation that hopefully someone can walk from left to right down and say, oh, this is a specific event and this is another event. So it's one congruent set that hopefully conveys multiple different scenes and things happening. So hopefully it creates a timeline.
No, I think it works really well. And coming back down to the beginning here with all these different buildings, it looks like some of like modular building inspiration there, what all is represented in the town here.
Oh, yeah. So a decent amount of these are module buildings that we brought in for pre-existing Lego sets, just because they work well in just about every environment. The different stylizations and stuff that a lot of these pre-made Lego kit buildings have bring a lot of depth and color to an area that was otherwise hard to do. There are a few custom pieces on it. I think the corner shop in the very front with the red and green awnings is a customized piece that was added in to the front just to help break it up so it wasn't just Lego kits, essentially.
And then there's lots of minifigures throughout here, whether it's the civilians or the soldier minifigures. What types of kind of accessories and weapons is there? Is there a lot of custom stuff on there as well?
Oh, yeah, for the most part, especially the soldiers almost exclusively have a tons of different custom stuff. They were all essentially collaborated and brought by the four of us, and we all said, hey, here's what we can offer, and we found a use for the majority of it. I don't really think any of the individual minifigures came from a specific set, because we took the time to try to individualize every single minifigure that is out on here. Has a different face, looks different, is expressing a different emotion. There's not any individual fig that's just out of a box and sat down. So we took time to make sure they all had different hair, different outfits on, just to make sure that, it wasn't just the same thing everywhere you looked.
And we've got a couple of aerial vehicles represented as well here. So what are those?
So we have the Turkish drone coming over the city here, which has been a thing that's been in the news a lot and used a lot by the Ukrainian forces. So that's your unmanned aerial vehicle. To the right, we have a Russian, I think it's a Hind helicopter, I believe. So this one is something that Patt brought. I believe this one might be a kit. I think there might be some additional stuff put onto it too. But we wanted to show things happening, on the ground, in the buildings, and in the air as well. So we wanted to make sure there was pieces represented from different parts. And these are kind of pieces and things that have been in the news a lot, especially drones, helicopters, aerial kind of stuff. So we want to make sure we had a few pieces that showed that as well.
And you mentioned there was a lot of discussion among all the different collaborators here. Did you guys ever physically set the stuff up before the show, or is this the first time it's all been together?
That's a really good question. This is the first time it's all been together. So a lot of us live outside of driving distance from each other, so a lot of it was text messages, Discord, a handful of pictures that we said, hey, mine is about this many studs deep and this many long. Can you match me somewhere? And so we all brought lots of extra bags of pieces and things where we said, okay, let's set them all down and let's figure out how to fill in the gaps. So a lot of the time before the show started was sitting here, scratching chins, going, how do we make this all work and fit together?
Now, we've covered a lot of military history-related builds on Beyond the Brick, but it's rare to see one that's kind of based on current events like what you're seeing with this layout here. So what has the public response been like as the people have come through BrickCon here?
So far, it's been really positive. It's been very interesting because that was something that was on the fore of our minds as well, because we've done some military builds before, but oftentimes they're historical. They're things that have happened well in the past. They're many years old. So there was a concern that we all talked about before we did this is something that's, very close to the heart of a lot of people. It's something that's currently ongoing. And so we tried very hard to represent things in a way that hopefully wasn't triggering to people, but at the same time, hopefully got people looking at something and realized an event and a thing is happening out there. So maybe it's not something on the tip of everyone's minds at the moment, but we are hoping that it rekindled some of that for people and brought awareness to events going on in Ukraine. And overall, the majority of the responses and things we've heard have been intensely positive. There's been a lot of pointing, going, oh, I recognize that thing, or, a friend leaning over saying, oh, did you see this? I just heard about, this thing being used on the news for the first time. So it seems to have kindled a lot of conversation about what's going on in current events, which is good, because there was some concern among us that doing something like this was a little bit close to what's happening today and could be a little jarring for some people to see.
No, I think you guys did a great job, and I think it's really neat that you're able to bring this out and give the public that experience of seeing some of these scenes depicted. So thank you to you and the rest of the collaborators for all your work here, and thanks for taking us through the whole layout. I appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much for being here, too. Thanks for having us.